Derech Mitzvosecha. Issur Sinas Yisroel, Mitzvas Ahavas Yisroel, the prohibition of hating another Jew, and the mitzvah to love another Jew. What have we learned so far? So we saw what Sefer Chinuch says, quoting from the original source of the Torah that you're not supposed to hate your brother in your heart, and Sefer Chinuch says that the Torah is going straight to the heart because all ill behavior follows from there. Don't hate your brother in your heart, and then everything should be fine. And if you're like, oh, I don't hate my brother in my heart, I'm just going to treat him not good, there's other prohibitions against that. How do we have that also? The next mitzvah, Mitzvas Ahavas Yisroel. You have to love your fellow in your soul. So down to the soul level. And then from there, all good behaviors are followed. You'll be careful with his money, his honor, his good name, his wife, etc., all these things. When you have love of someone down to your core level, then all these good things will follow. And this also, straight from the Torah, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellow as yourself. Then we saw the story of the Maamar, where the person wants to convert, and he goes to Hillel, teach with the whole Torah on one foot, and he says, what's hateful to you, don't do to somebody else. Everything else is commentary, and go learn it. It's an interesting thing. First of all, the phraseology of what's hateful, don't do to somebody else. That's one thing, but how can you say that love of somebody else is actually the basis for all the mitzvahs? That makes sense for all the mitzvahs that have to do with other people, anything that has to do with relationships, interpersonal relationships. So all the civil laws, all of that makes sense. But how do you bring that in when you're talking about the mitzvahs between me and God? What does love of another Jew have to do with that? Not just that, but we see that before we start davening, we're supposed to say the Hareini Mekabel. You're supposed to accept upon yourself the mitzvah of loving somebody else. Davening is definitely between only me and God. So there, even before I start davening, and not just that, the Pri Etz Chaim, Reb Chaim Vital is writing the teaching of the Rizal, saying you have to accept Ahavas Yisroel upon yourself for your davening to be successful. Which is to say, Ahavas Yisroel is somehow connected or integral somehow to the mitzvahs between me and God. So what is that? Speaking about the Rizal, we saw that the Rizal, even though the Rizal was a tzaddik, great Kabbalist, etc., we were told that he used to say the confession. He used to say the vidui prayers. Why? What's going on here is we learn Adam is what we call an neshama klalis, which is an encompassing soul. Everyone is part of the one soul, which took form in Adam, the first man. That we say that everyone's part of the neshama klalis, everybody's part of this first man, and then every one of us draws down a soul from a different limb of the body, basically. So ultimately, we're all connected, and we're branching off from this one man according to whatever limb type soul we have. We saw also that even the idea of Adam can be from the word of Adam ala Elyon, that I'll be like the one above. So when man does what he's supposed to do, this is said, his name is in praise for him. You're godlike in your behaviors. It's a name of praise and raising yourself up, versus if someone does what they're not supposed to do, then you're like, oh, your name of Adam comes from Adam of the ground. You're just being like dirt. That brought us to the name of Adam adds up, the numerical value of it, the gematria is 45, and that's just like, what do you know? It's just like the name of Ma. What is the name of Ma? That's the name of Havaya. Spell it with Aleph, so that equals 45. There's a dimension of the name of Havaya, which is the name of infinity, the name of mercy, revelation, etc. The name that powers all of creation. That dimension that's making it all happen is the name of Ma. It adds up to 45. Why is this important? Because we saw, especially last time, we were learning about the different kind of worlds. The world of Tohu, quote unquote, the world of chaos, that's a world that each attribute is one under the other, separate. They can't integrate. They can't speak to each other. The energy of it, the light of it is too strong. But we said, when you're working in a group, that there's such strong sort of personalities, people are not working together. Here, I think it's in this Maamar, it also describes it in the sense that it's so much long to go back to its source, it kind of broke out of its own containment. Either because they were too strong frenetic energies, they somehow broke out of their containment. They couldn't be contained. The next world, the world of Tikkun, the world of fixing it, the world of order, more world that we have, those are dimmer lights, but because they're a little bit dimmer, they can interact with each other. This name of Ma is what facilitates all that. So this name of Ma, which again, the name that we've correlated to Adam, 45, this is the name that allows the integration. We kind of described one path could bring two totally separate paths together. This is kind of what could happen. Some of these attributes seem to be totally opposite each other, totally different from each other, yet this name allows for integration, interrelation, etc. So they all in a way contain a part of each other, so that way they can speak to each other. Then we saw the whole thing from Tikkun Azar Pasach Eliyahu that Elijah the prophet said, explained basically the whole system of how God manifests in the world. So we have all this description of how God works in the world through these spheres, through these attributes. God shows kindness through the attribute of kindness. God shows wisdom through the attribute of wisdom, etc. Yet none of them are him, none of them fully contain it. Ultimately, even whatever understanding we have, God is still beyond our comprehension. The whole system comes back through the name of Ma. Which brings us to, just like we had this whole description here about the interrelation between the spheres, similarly, all souls of the Jewish people form a complete entity, the all-encompassing soul of Adam, Neshama Klalis. Although it contains 248 distinct Avarim limbs, they're still interrelated. Even though we're all different limbs of a body, these limbs all still are interrelated with each other. How is that? A foot and a hand are not the same thing. What do you mean they're connected to each other still? For example, although a single body has a head, feet, hands, and nails, each part is included in the other. They can't speak to each other otherwise if they don't include the other. If not, they're like the world of Toh, where everything's just a separate entity. Here, we're interrelation. The hand has vitality, gains life from the foot through the connecting veins. And so it is with all limbs and organs. Thus, one part of the body can be healed through drawing blood from another. What do you mean the hand and the foot have what to do with each other? They're two totally separate organs. Yet, there are veins connecting them, which means that there's the same blood is pumping through both of these limbs or organs. We're kind of using these terms a little bit loosely because of the Hebrew, Ivarim, limbs. It's a loose term that we're using here. But we understand the general idea of it. That's why you could draw blood from one place and inject it into another place, because it's the same blood that's pumping through it all. If not, no, this is hand blood. You can't put it anywhere anywhere else, and that's not the case. The interrelation between organs and life energy comes from the general life force shining in the brain, from where it particularizes and individualizes. Remember we learned in Tanya that where's the seat of the Nefesh Elokis is in the brain and in the heart, and the Nefesh Habahamis is in the heart. Thus the brain feels pain from all 248 limbs, with the pain of the arm or leg equal before it. How does it make sense that a brain, in your mind, you could actually feel pain from a different part of your body? Well, because they're actually still connected to each other in their way. Not because one is greater than the other, but because life force for each limb comes from the soul and the brain. As such, at times, the pain from a wound in the nail is felt more acutely than pain from a wound in the hand. So it's not just that I can feel pain, it can actually distinguish between the pain that's being felt. How does that make sense? Why does my mind know what's going on? Because ultimately, the mind, where the soul is the seat of everything, because it's giving to all these parts. There's still a connection between them all. Just on a more external level, we see that the hand and the foot are connected to each other because the veins pumping the blood through the body, all the pathways are connected to each other. And if you go even higher than that, you're talking about the soul sitting in the brain, gives to all of it. That's how there's full communication between all the parts of the body, because ultimately they're all connected. We're getting somewhere with this whole interrelation business. Remember, this is all starting by the idea that all Jews are part of one body. This is from Tanya explaining the idea of the soul and the brain feeding to the body. If you remember this verse, the key to understanding the subject is to be found in the text. And from my flesh I see God. This is coming in when it's talking about how does God send the divine light down into the world. If you remember, we spoke about how each world has its kind of brain center. Whatever part of the Torah is its brain center of that world, and then it feeds the rest of the world. So here it's saying you could see the same thing working in a human body. You have a brain center, the soul and the brain that feeds the rest of the body, and then it correlates it to God operating within the world. Here we're focusing on, obviously, the body part of it. From my flesh I see God. This is from Iyov, from Job. It's not exactly what it's referring to in the text, but when you take it out of the text, you can interpret it like that, because it's a little bit more of a literal translation. On a literal level, from what we see within our own soul and body, we can visualize a parallel on the spiritual level. By way of analogy, the human soul pervades all 248 organs of the body, from head, the highest part of the body, to foot, the lowest part of the body. The soul pervades the body to the extent that no organ or portion of it remains void of the soul. Nevertheless, the soul's principal abode in a revealed form and dwelling place in an all-encompassing non-revealed form is in the brain. And from the brain, the soul is diffused throughout all organs. As we've been saying, the soul in the brain is the source and life of everything, and from there, it sends out to all of it. There's an aspect that's equally in all of it, as in every part of your body is equally alive, and then there's a particularized part of it. Each part of the body is then given a power that is specific to that part of the body. The hands are their dexterity, your eyes given the power of sight, your ears given the power of hearing. And by the way, just as a side thing, the soul itself is always perfect. So whether or not the translation to the body is always perfect is separate than the soul being perfect. It's not specifically brought in here, but part of the example that's brought for this is a person who seems to not be physically perfect can actually have a perfect child, because the soul itself is fully intact. Someone who's blind can have a child who sees. Someone who's deaf can have a child who hears, because the soul itself is still intact and perfect. There's not anything missing in their soul. There's something that's just not fully transferring when it comes to the soul giving over to the physical body. The soul itself is wholly perfect. Okay, this takes place in all the organs simultaneously. For this diffusion of the soul is the force from which the organs derive life, in which respect all organs are equal. So again, everything is equally alive. In Chassidic terminology, this is light, a revelation that's equal throughout. The sun just shines. Everything gets light equally. The second aspect of the emanation from the soul and the body to the organs is, moreover, each organ receives from the soul a different form of life force and functional power appropriate to it according to the organ's composition and character. Everything's equally alive, but also everything gets its specific power. The difference between the function and ability between one organ and another isn't from the organ itself, like water in a colored glass, which takes on the color of its contained vessel. Rather, the eye receives from the soul a life force and ability to see, the ear receives from the soul a life force and ability to hear, the mouth to speak, and the feet to walk. Each organ, in accordance with its composition and character, receives its life force and ability from the soul, which dwells and becomes revealed initially in the brain, as we clearly sense how in the brain one is conscious of all that occurs within the 248 organs and of everything experienced by them, because the brain is the nerve center and principal abode and source of the life force of the entire body. This is what we just said. It's not that the eye on its own contains the power of sight, but because the eye is best suited for the power of sight, the soul will give the eye the power of sight. So there's a distinction. The soul makes everything equally alive, but it also gives it specific powers. Because everything is coming from the soul and the brain, feeding it all, that's why everything ultimately can speak back to it. There's communication between the two because they're all related to each other. The aim of all the text that we're looking at now is about interrelation. The way that, sure, things might seem to take on their own kind of identities and forms, but ultimately everything is still connected to each other. Do you see where we're going with this? We're talking about how all Jews are part of one body, and yet we see it separate, but ultimately everything is still related to each other. That's not the punchline of the Maamar yet. That's one thing the Maamar is going to build to. Okay, the life force from the soul, which animates the body, comprises two aspects. This is summarizing what we just saw. One is its life-giving force, in that the whole body is alive and draws its vitality from the soul. In this aspect, there's no difference between one organ and the next. The head is no more alive than the foot, just as the foot is no less alive than the head. The entire body with all its organs is equally alive throughout. In the Chassidic terminology, this aspect of the life-giving force is called the light of the soul, for light shines equally upon everything around the light source, regardless of the quality or nature of the objects receiving the light. The whole idea of light is that it just shines. It doesn't temper according to, oh, what am I shining on right now? Light just shines. So that's why soul and the body making everything alive is the same kind of idea. It's called light. Everything just gets. Everything is just alive. The second aspect of the soul's life force is the specific specific functional power each organ draws from the soul. This power is unique to each organ. The eye receives the power to see, the ear to hear, the mouth to speak, the foot to walk. This aspect can be explained in two ways. So these two we know. Now we're going to go into a little bit of philosophical discussion about, the second aspect about each thing getting its own particular functioning powers. How does it play out? One is that the life force emanating from the soul to the organ is plain and uncompounded, with none of the diverse qualities and powers of the various organs. Accordingly, the various functions of the organs are differentiated only after that life force actually becomes enclosed within the organs. As in, the soul is just giving an extra boost of power to the organ, and the organs all take this and use this for sight or for hearing or whatever. So it's not the power of hearing that's being given to it, it's just an extra boost of life energy that it's going to take and use. I'll use this now for hearing. For example, only after the life force becomes enclosed within the eye would it become the power of sight, and only after it becomes enclosed within the ear would it become the power of hearing. The two ways that this can be seen is either the soul gives it the power of hearing, or the soul gives it power and it uses it for hearing. An analogy is water in a colored glass. Although it remains colorless since it is seen through the walls of a white or red vessel, it seems white or red to the viewer. It's the container that gives it the coloring, not what the actual power is, because I just put the same power into everything. Then once it's in a container, now it takes on a certain color. But it's interesting, white is considered the color of chesed, kindness is white, and gevura, strength, might, etc. is red, white and red. Interesting stuff. We actually saw that a little bit when we saw the Maamar. Remember we said that all the animals that are red-fleshed animals are coming from gevura, the face of the ox and the lion, those kind of animals, because that's heat, strength, fire kind of idea. Likewise, each organ receives a plain, uncompounded life force from the soul, and the organ gives the life force a specific functional ability. The eye enables the life force to give the power to see, and the ear enables it to give the power to hear. This is not the one that we're following, but this is one suggestion. The soul gives it a power, and then the organ defines the power. Or does the soul define the power before it gives it to the organ? That's what the discussion is. The second explanation, accepted by the Tanya, is that the soul, despite its pristine, uncompounded essence, includes in potential all the powers of the various organs, which each individual organ then receives. So this is actually very similar a little bit to what we saw in the Pasach Aliyah, what we saw from Elijah the prophet. God is essentially, in his essence, is just simple wholeness. Sometimes the depth of something is in the simplicity of it. The reason why we like the magnet phrases and the quips and the witty sentences is because you've taken something massive and you've condensed it into a single line. Similarly, when we talk about God, if you would look at God, we wouldn't see everything that exists within creation tucked somewhere within God, and God's like, let me pull out the stars now and put them out there. Let me pull the trees out and put them out there. Instead, everything in God is just part of the wholesome oneness. Now, there's obviously a potential for all of it to exist, but the higher up you go, the less distinction you're going to see till everything just becomes part of the wholeness of it. It's only when you're moving out, per se, and you're kind of dimming and reshaping the light. It doesn't change the light, but you're kind of giving it different containers and vessels to be in that actually starts becoming other things. The soul and the body, sight and hearing and all that in potential is within the soul. You don't necessarily see it in the soul, because the soul is just a wholesome essence-ness. However, once it then sends out the power, we got to be giving each thing its function, then it could start taking on a form of, now this will become the power of sight. The eye receives from the life force of the soul the power to see, and the ear the power to hear. These powers are originally included in potentia within the soul, and each becomes revealed as the life force becomes enclosed within the respective organ. So again, you don't necessarily see it in the soul, but only once it's drawn out and brought to the organ, now we see this what you're drawing out, now we see this is now the power of sight. Thus, the power to see or hear does not originate only when the life force becomes enclosed within the eye or ear. It already exists in potentia within the soul, although it is not yet revealed. 4. If the various functional powers are not differentiated in potentia within the life force until after it becomes enclosed within the organs, like water or light, which does not itself possess a color but acquires it when viewed through colored glass, then the brain would be conscious of the same sensation from what is experienced in the eye as from what is experienced in the ear, because these sensations have already left their respective organs. If there wasn't the potential for differentiation, everything would feel the same to the brain, as in already within the soul the power of differentiation. Thus, too, water removed from a white vessel is no different from water removed from a red vessel. Once removed from the vessel, it loses the vessel's color. Likewise, messages conveying sensations from the eye would be no different from those coming from the ear. So the argument that Tanya is making against those who would say this argument, as in it only becomes the power of sight once it's in the eye, which is like saying this becomes red once I put it in a red vessel. But if I take it out of the red vessel, it's not red anymore. The water will go back to its original thing. So Tanya's saying that argument again. So he said, if that's the case, then when the eye sends messages back to the brain, it should lose its distinction at that point. It should just go back to just being a light, like a plain light that goes back to the brain. It doesn't have, per se, the power of sight anymore because it's left that which gives it the power of sight. So that's why Tanya's saying that's not the case. The soul has to contain this potential within it, or else when it comes back to the brain would just be like, I feel a sensation, and not know what it was reading. According to this argument, the difference affected by each organ in the life force drawn into it from the soul remains also in the sensation transmitted from the organ back to the brain even after it leaves the organ. This would account for the different messages received by the brain for the varying sensations and occurrences experienced by the eye and ear, for example. So the fact that the brain can't actually tell the difference between the eye and the ear and what's messaging in and what it's saying is because the soul contains the potential for all of it. If you see the imagery that we're trying to build here and the discussion that's going here is how can a whole simple essence also have different parts to it? How does this work of the different parts within a whole simple essence? And there is an interrelation between the two. This is what's being described here. That there's there's a potential within the whole simple essence, and that potential becomes revealed when it actually starts, per se, getting removed from it, when it starts moving away from it. But if you would say, oh, no, this doesn't have the potential for it. This is just a light that just shines. And then when it goes to all the different things, then they take on whatever form they want to. There's no individualization of it or anything like that. There's not speaking to each other then. Because if you try to send a message back, it's like, I don't know what I'm getting here right now. I'm just feeling stuff. Instead, we have to build the case for the fact that we have the whole simple essence, and even when things get a little bit removed, they're still ultimately connected to the whole simple essence. If, however, the soul, based in the brain, utterly transcends any kind of differentiation, even a differentiation of potentia in which the various powers of the organs are included within the soul, then the soul will not distinguish between the sensation of what happens in the eye or the ear or any other organs, because the soul itself is utterly plain and uncompounded. So either you say, oh, it's the organ that has the sight. We say, no, the potential for sight is in the soul. But what if the soul doesn't have the potential for sight? So you'd have the same kind of issue here. One way or another, we wouldn't have the full relaying of the messages. The whole has the potential for the part within it. So that way, when there is a part, it's still ultimately connected and drawn back to the whole in an individualized sense. That the whole could say, yes, I recognize what this part is, because the potential for it always existed. Even if the messages from the various organs to the brain are indeed different ones, this difference would not be distinguished by the soul in the brain, which transcends all differences between organic functions. So even if the brain didn't have the potential for it, it would just be like, hey, no difference between anything. And that's not the case. We know that's not the case, because we know the brain perceives the differences between the messages that are getting sent back to it. We must therefore say that a difference exists between the various functional powers later revealed in the organs even before the life force is actually drawn from the soul to the organs. That's how Tanya comes to his conclusion to say, no, the soul contains in potential the power of sight, and when it gets drawn out, it gives it over to the eye, where it then manifests as the power of sight. But the potential existed in the soul, this wholesome simplicity, uncompoundedness. Now, the variation in receiving the functional powers and life force by the organs of the body from the soul, each organ receiving from the soul a life force and power in a different form, does not derive from the soul's essence and being. Then we should say that its being and essence is divided into 248 different parts, which are enclosed in 248 locations, according to the design of the various locations of the body's organs. So it's not that the soul has 248 compartments in it. It always uses 248 limbs, however Torah calculates that. That's always the way that it speaks of it. Remember, it's like the 248 positive commandments. So it's not that the soul is divided into 248 parts or has 248 compartments. That's not either how it works. Very technical philosophical debate here. Were this the case within the soul itself, there would already be revealed and differentiated the various functional powers of sight, hearing, and so on. And these 248 powers would enclose in 248 organs, each at its appropriate location. We'd have differentiation in the soul, and we don't. Because according to this, it would follow that the soul's essence and being is designed in a physical design and a likeness and structure similar to the structure of the body, God forbid. How can we not say that it has compartmentalized into the 248 limbs, because the soul then would have some sort of form and structure like the physical body, and the soul is not that either. Just as the organs of the body have various shapes and forms, so according to this outlook are the functional powers, while still within the soul differ from each other in form. But again, we cannot accept this. Rather, the soul is entirely a single spiritual entity. And remember, where are we going? All the Jews are part of a single soul entity. As a single entity, its oneness is plain and uncompounded. As a spiritual entity, its spirituality is in a form apart from any physical design and of any type of definition of physical space, measure, or limitation. As in, we cannot classify it in any way because it's a spiritual form. The soul is free of all such dimensions by virtue of its intrinsic being and essence. In fact, the soul is so quote-unquote plain and free of all these that even when it is actually enclosed within the organs, they cannot affect any change in the soul. So yes, the soul can enliven the body and give it the power, etc., but the body cannot affect the soul that is giving it life, in the sense that it can't make any change to the soul. And it is not valid to say concerning the soul's being and essence that is in the brain of the head more than in the feet, since its being and essence is not subject to the concept and dimension of physical space and limitation. We say it's headquartered in the brain, but we're just using this as terminology for us to understand stuff with. It is therefore possible to attribute to the soul this limitation of being more in the head than in the feet. That's also why not one thing is more alive than the other. Rather, 613 kinds of functional powers and vital forces are included within the soul, within its being and essence, to become actualized and to emerge from this concealment and inclusion within the soul's essence. The potential for everything is in the soul, and when it comes out, it will manifest as what it needs to be. While still within the soul's essence, they are only in potentia and hidden within the soul. In other words, within the soul is concealed a potential for 613 functional powers to become actualized and to emerge from concealment, as in to become revealed. To animate the 248 organs and 365 blood vessels of the body through the functional powers of the divine soul, becoming clothed with the animating or vital source, which also possesses the corresponding 248 and 365 functional powers and vital sources. These aren't exact translations to say 248 organs and limbs and 365 blood vessels. We're kind of translating, but it's not an exact that you can exactly count it out with the way that it has it here. But 248, 365 is 613. And remember, 248 are all the thou shalt mitzvos, and 365 are all the thou shalt not mitzvos. Now, concerning the flow of all the 613 kinds of functional powers and vital forces, which are drawn from the concealment of the soul, where they are previously hidden, and from where they are now drawn to the body to animate it, concerning this flow, the sages have said that the principal dwelling place and abode of this flow, and revelation is entirely situated in the brains of the head. Therefore, the brains first receive the power and life force appropriate to them according to their composition and character, namely the three intellectual faculties, chachma, bina, dat, that's wisdom, understanding, application of knowledge, and the faculty of thought, and whatever pertains to the brain. All these receive their life force from the soul before the other parts of the body. Because the soul doesn't have any sort of measurement, you can't physically say it's one place more than the other, but when we say that it's in the head, we're saying that there the soul will animate the head first and then give to the rest of the body. The intellectual faculties get first and everything else. And not only this, that the brains receive their own life force first, but also the overall flow of all the individual streams of vitality, as in the life to the other organs, is also first included and closed in the brains of the head before it becomes revealed in the individual organs. And is there in the brain that the core and source of the flow exists in a form in which the light and vitality of the entire soul are revealed. In other words, when the general flow of vitality reaches the brain, then the light and vitality of the entire body begin to be revealed. The soul in the brain is where everything goes down. That's the starting point for everything, and from there, it then feeds out to the rest of the body. From there, radiance flows to all the other organs, each of which receive the functional power and vital force appropriate to it according to its composition and character. The power of sight is revealed in the eye, the power of hearing in the ear, and so on. At which point does a power of sight come into existence ready to be revealed in the eye and a power of hearing in the ear? Only after the overall life force of the whole body is drawn into the brain in a general manner. Then a radiance is drawn from there to each organ, a radiance which is already constituted in accordance with a particular character of the individual organ. So everything is in the brain, and from there it draws light to each one. There's calling it a radiance, gets drawn to each one, and that gives it the power of whatever it needs to be. But all the functional powers flow from the brain, as is known, for there in the brain is located the principal dwelling place of the entire soul in a revealed form. Although the soul exists all over the body equally, the principal place the soul is revealed is in the brain, as we just said. Since there in the brain, the overall life force which flows from the soul is revealed. It is only the individual faculties of the overall life force which shine forth and radiate from there, the brain, to all the organs of the body, just as light radiates and shines from the sun into the innermost of rooms. Even the heart, which is a central organ from which all other organs receive vitality, as in the heart diffuses to all organs, receives its own vital force from the brain, which is why the brain naturally dominates the heart, as explained above. Talk about moach shalat alev, mind over matter kind of idea. The intellect is supposed to rule over their motive attributes. Well, the heart also keeps everybody alive. Yes, but the heart can only do heart stuff once the brain has given it the power to do the heart stuff that it's supposed to. So that's why ultimately the heart is subservient to the mind, to the brain. Man is created with a natural supremacy of the brain over the heart, because the heart, despite its centrality, must receive its own vital force from the soul through the medium of the brain. That whole long section there is to tell us, again, the essential idea of everything being contained in the whole, which then gives into individualized. But in the whole is the potential for everything that becomes individualized from it, which is part of the setup that we're doing, that we're saying man is all part of one whole entity, but yet we're all individualized, so we're seeing here how this functioning goes down on an own personal level. Ultimately, we'll see how all this comes down to the secret of Ahavas Yisroel.